Hey guys, Brian Castro here with Better Chess Training, and in today's video we are going to introduce a little mini series on chess strategy and positional play. So we're going to talk about just what we're going to be getting into, kind of a almost like a course outline, but I do want to discuss what strategy and positional play is, as well as the elements that we're going to be studying over the next few weeks. So if you are new to this channel, think about subscribing so you can get notified when those videos come out. And if you enjoy these types of videos, give me a like. And for this video, I have a personal goal of getting 10 likes in the first week. So if you enjoy this, please hit that like button. Okay, let's get to it. Okay, what is strategy? There are I don't know who said this exactly, but it's what you do when you don't have anything to do. Okay, so of course, if your opponent leaves their queen unprotected and you can get it for free, you're going to do something like that usually. Or if you see a mate in two or instant checkmate, then you should make that move. But sometimes there just isn't anything to do, and so that's where we need strategy to decide what the best thing to do is. Strategy is making plans based on elements of the position, and that's what we're going to be talking about later in this video and in this series. What are those elements and what do they tell us? Finally, making decisions based on trade-offs between positional elements. Now, this is an aspect that is really important to understand, okay? I think a lot of beginners, their main two of these positional elements that they focus on are material and king safety, which I'll mention momentarily. But strategy is about making trade-offs. Sometimes you have to give up something. And if you've watched my videos where I comment on my games, sometimes I might sacrifice a pawn in order to gain something else. Or I might give up control of a file to work in another area of the board. So unless your opponent is much weaker than you or makes a lot of mistakes, a lot of times they're going to be going for certain imbalances or advantages in a position while you're going for others. And the whole beauty of chess is to try to see which one of those who made the right decisions. Okay, keep moving here. What is positional play? Okay, and strategy and positional play are often lumped together, but there are slight differences, and I don't want to quibble about them too much, but just so you understand, they're not always used synonymously. So choosing moves that improve an aspect of your position, and we're going to talk about those a little today, as well as in the coming weeks. Making moves that conform to a preconceived plan or objective. Okay, so sometimes the plan might be small, like get my piece to safety because it's being attacked, or it might be more extensive, like taking control of a specific square, and it might take 3 or 4 or 5 moves to realize that objective. Okay, and then positional play involves moves that have long-term consequences to the strategy of the game. Okay, so those moves, they kind of interlap. Okay, like if you think of positional play and strategy, they often interlap. But the idea I want you to get is that it is a long-term process. Not just, your moves have sometimes long-term consequences, and you want to make sure that you understand those before you make those moves. All right, why is studying this important? Like I said, most beginners and many intermediate players don't understand or are not aware of what positional play is. So if you are playing people who are beginners, and you understand this and are also good at tactics and other aspects of chess, then you're going to have a distinct advantage over them. Okay. The next point is very important because I think studying tactics is very important. So I hope you don't misunderstand me. But sometimes there isn't a fork or a pin or some type of tactical motif on the board. Okay. In fact, that's most of the time. Normally, it would require a mistake on your opponent's part in order to get some type of tactical combination. But it is because the consequences of missing one is so great. Many coaches and grandmasters and different people who talk about it encourage tactical study, which I also encourage. But sometimes you just don't have one on the board, so you need to know what to do. Okay, another reason is just more for future training. It's good to understand positional elements and study them, because when you're looking at your moves in your games, you can start to say, oh, well, there I had some weak squares on f6, and that's why my opponent was able to invade. Or I need to, if I would have taken more control of the d file, I would have had an advantage. When you can speak in language has power, and when you can name motifs and themes and strategies that you could repeat over and over again, you'll be able to both learn them better as well as have a common language for yourself, and if you're studying, if you have a chess coach or whatnot, in order to be able to communicate. And I think that can't be underestimated. Okay, and finally, those combinations and tactics that we talked about earlier, well, it's just like I've been very interested in jiu-jitsu, and even though I haven't gotten very far in my own studies, the Brazilian Jiu-Jitsu is a form of martial arts, and they believe in having a superior position to your opponent. And then you can do, if you ever watch these matches on TV, on cable, then you could do these submissions and different moves. It's the same thing with chess. If you have a better position where you are dominating your opponent positionally, well, it's going to be easier for them to make a mistake, and also easier for you to maybe press an issue and force a weakness that's going to lead to those tactical combinations that you spent so much time studying. So just keep that in mind. Okay, what are positional elements? There's two main types, but again, don't get too caught up with this on what's a static. Static, which we could say are more long-term, permanent, are also known as permanent advantages, and dynamic elements, which are more short-term. It's good to note, because a lot of chess writers write about static and dynamic, but as you'll see when we look over what they are, there is often overlap between static and dynamic, a middle space, as we'll see, where yes, it's static, but it also is something that needs to be taken advantage of quickly, otherwise the moment will be lost. So that in that way, it is very dynamic also. But anyways, that's some people do classify them, but don't get too hung up on it, okay? In chess, and this is what makes it both difficult to master as well as a beautiful game for to learn for your lifetime, you're going to have to consider many of these elements in your specific positions that you reach, but sometimes one element is going to be more impactful or more important at that time. Okay, so that's of course where your judgment comes in, and experience, and hopefully videos like the ones I put on this channel will help you to develop that experience and that knowledge. Okay, like I said before, most beginners only consider material and king position, and some only consider material. I want to get that piece. Okay, and so you need to go beyond that in order. And that, by the way, it is important, right? If you let your opponent take a rook or a bishop away from you for free, then you're at a disadvantage for the most part, unless you're about to checkmate them or about to win some material back. Okay, and finally, I want you to think trade-offs and imbalances. Okay, so it's not just a matter of if neither player makes what we'd say a tactical mistake or a short-term mistake where they lose, they get checkmated, then it is often a case of giving away something in order to get something. Okay, as Bobby Fischer used to say, in order to get squares, you need to give squares. In order to gain for example, if you gain an advantage in space, and I shouldn't go too much in this, then you're giving away maybe some squares behind. Okay, so it's not just one way or the other; it's imbalances. Of course, that's what makes this game so creative and beautiful. I see Silman here. Jeremy Silman talks a little bit about imbalances. That's what he calls his positional elements. He calls them imbalances in his Reassess Your Chess series, and I'll put a link to that in the notes. Okay. Let's go into what these elements are. And again, what I'm going to be doing is I'm going to be covering a couple of these each video each week. So today I'm really just going to kind of describe them or define them, and then in future videos in the coming weeks, we're going to go in a little more detail with some examples. Okay, so just follow along for now. Okay, first one here is material, and it's not just, I have a video on the value of the pieces, because it's not like basketball where, you score a basket and there's a point value. There's a relative value of the pieces. For example, a bishop or a knight is about 3 pawns worth. Okay, so they're about, but again, that's all relative and it's all specific to the position. So material is something that needs to be considered. In this section, we're also going to consider the different types of material, like bishops versus knights, 2 bishops, that type of thing. I'm kind of lumping that in both with material as well with piece activity, which we'll talk about in dynamic elements. Okay, king positions, very important. So it does involve king safety, but depending on the phase of the game, like in the end game, king safety is less critical, obviously unless you're about to be checkmated, but it is more important to bring your king out in order to be more active. So king position, though, is something you definitely need to note. And definitely need to consider in all of your moves. Pawn structure. So this is the position of the pawn. So this will help you with your planning in terms of gaining space and knowing where to break with pawns, as well as creating and defending pawn weaknesses. Okay, and we'll get into that in our series here. The center, always a critical thing to think about, and what I'm talking about here is control of the center. And it's very difficult to have total control of the center, of course, unless your opponent neglects it altogether. But the idea here is understanding what type of center you have and what squares you control in that center. But it is an element that needs to be discussed. Space. So this simple way to think about this is the amount of squares behind your pawns. Okay, so if you advance your pawn to d4, for example, from d2, now you've created space on the d file. Okay, if you push up the c pawn and the b pawn, you will have space on the queen side. Okay, whereas if you push your e pawn and f pawn, you'll have more space on the king side. And so the pawn structure, the center, and space are all kind of related to each other in that effect, and we'll talk about that as well. Next up, open files and diagonals. Okay, and we talk about this a lot in my game videos. Controlling those is very important. These are the doorways in order to attack your opponent's king or a weak pawn or something like that. Strong and weak squares. Again, so now this is more related to open files and diagonals. Basically, control of territory, being able to have access for your pieces to get to where it needs to go to, whether it's the opposing king or getting to a weak pawn or something to that effect. So again, we will talk about that as well. Now, what you can see here from this discussion is that these elements often intermingle and overlap somewhat. So don't worry about that, okay? This is the tough part about chess. You can't totally isolate one aspect without considering the others. But we try our best to use examples so that we can do that, because we need to start somewhere so we can learn. Okay, so these are the static elements. By the way, there's different people who have laid out different types of elements. For example, Kasparov just uses 3, time, quality, and material, as his 3 elements. So of course, it encompasses things like pawn structure and open files and stuff like that. Similarly, Jeremy Silman, who I mentioned, he has 7 imbalances. Steinitz, I think, had 9 elements of the position. So here, I'm not trying to reinvent the wheel, but I'm looking at when I play chess, these are the things that I try to look at. So these are the things we're going to be talking about. Okay, dynamic elements. Again, these are a little more short term, and typically an idea, although it's not always the case, we try to trade in one of these dynamic elements and try to create more static elements or advantages in our static elements. Okay, so development. So development is just getting the pieces from where their starting points. Okay, so this is typically relegated to the opening phase, but can stretch into the middle game, obviously, depending on specific openings and structures. Piece activity. Basically, the more scope a piece has. You know, a bishop or a knight, say, on d5 has a lot more scope than a knight on a1. Okay, if you can imagine that. Again, we're going to go over more examples. That's why I'm just kind of using the PowerPoint here today to describe these. And the initiative. The initiative is always something that is difficult to describe for me, but basically, again, using a martial arts term, if you're boxing, for example, and you're the one throwing the punches and your opponent's covering up and the one defending, and he's trying to throw some punches out there, but you're the one just kind of wailing on him, bad boxing technique on my part, but then you have the initiative. So it's the person who's pressuring, you could say. Okay, that could mean an attack. It doesn't necessarily mean an attack, but it's just kind of the person who's control. And the initiative is a very dynamic element and can be lost very quickly if an opponent can consolidate his position or maybe counterattack. So again, you want to use that maybe to gain material or to gain an open file, that type of thing, okay? And we'll talk about that as well. Okay, so again, this is just an introduction. And in a way, this series that we're going to be doing, and I'm not sure how many videos it's going to be yet, is sort of an introduction to this topic. And I'll put references throughout this video series. I encourage you to study, well, I mean, it's basically a lifelong pursuit. As long as you play chess, you're going to be studying strategy and positional play. But this, maybe I'm trying to create a good starting point for you, a good introduction to it, so that you can use these further resources like a Jeremy Silman book, or good one like Tiger Chess, the strategy course, to be able to further deepen your knowledge. Okay, so in summary, strategy and positional play is an important area for chess to learn. We've talked about why. Give you a big, actually, really, guys, if you're beginning in chess, of course you want to make sure you're not dropping pieces. You make sure your tactics are good. Learn some simple openings and end games, but you really want to start learning what strategy is and how to include it in your games after that. Okay, strategy and tactics, they need each other. Okay, you can't just be purely a tactical player or purely a strategic player. Listening to my coach, Grandmaster Nigel Davies, in one of his videos, talking about this, Kasparov, who is known as one of the best tactical players that ever lived the game, he was very versed in positional play. He was an incredible positional player. So he pushed the boundaries with his tactics, but there was always a strategic grounding in those tactics. Okay, by understanding positional elements, you can form better plans. Okay, the idea here is that chess is a war of ideas. Okay, is my bishop better than your knight? Okay, is my queenside attack better than your kingside attack? Okay, does the fact that you're leaving your king open, can I get to your king before you can before you can win material on the other side of the board? So it's always going to be this back and forth, and when you understand that, you can know, okay, I have 3 plans to choose from. This is the best plan. Okay, so that's hopefully what I will give you a foundation in. Finally, these tactics, and again, I don't mind repeating it. It flows from superior positions. Okay, you can be a great tactician, but if you have bad pawn structure, you let your opponent get a lot of space. You neglect your own king safety. You're never going to be able to pull off a tactic that's going to be, going to be able to recover from that. Of course, unless your opponent moves into a mating net or something. But you need good positions to do all those tactics. Okay, so I hope you will join me in future parts of this series in the coming weeks. I'm going to be putting these out on Friday. And again, hit that like button and subscribe so that you can see more of these. Hey guys, I hope you enjoyed that video. Again, it's just an introduction, but hopefully it will start getting your mind moving in your own games. And so that's what I want to challenge you to do this week. As you're playing your chess games, try to think more strategically. How do these moves, besides the tactics of it, how does this move improve my position? What kind of plans can I make to improve my position? Okay, and hopefully the future videos will help you to enhance that part of your game even more. Hit the like button if you enjoyed this. Again, my goal for this video is 10 likes in the first week. Hopefully we'll go many past that, but I really want to see if you guys have interest in this. It gives me motivation, and I enjoy seeing them. And also, if you haven't subscribed to this channel, subscribe so you can get future videos. And looking forward to continuing the series on strategy and positional play.